Hello, I'm Mike Hendrickson from O'Reilly Media. Today I'm going to be talking with Theo Schlossernagel from OmniTI for our video podcast series for Velocity. And today's conversation is going to center around DevOps as a career. Theo, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, one thing I've noticed in all the velocities around the world, there's been debates, kind of semantic debates, about WebOps, DevOps, WPO, and all these different terms. Can you distinguish the difference between them, or are they all really the same tribe and people are just arguing over words?
Well, WPO is more of a, I mean, WPO is a thing. It's an optimization effort, so web performance optimization. The web ops and DevOps and things like that, I think it's just a kind of a cultural movement where people want to get along better and break down silos in organizations. So they're all confused. Everyone's confused.
So, assuming we know that there's not a lot of difference between the types of people doing this, what are some of the more important goals that developers have to build systems that operate? And what does it mean to build systems that operate?
What are the important goals that developers have? I would say that they should have them. I don't meet developers that often that are really intent on building systems that operate. I think that operations people are really intent on making systems engineers build systems that operate. I think that that's a really difficult question to answer. There are a lot of aspects of software development that go into building software and deploying software and operating software. And I think that the approach that the DevOps movement takes is probably the quickest means to an end, which is to just make sure that software engineers that write products that run in production are responsible for making sure they run there. You give somebody access to troubleshoot something when it doesn't work right, and they will learn very quickly what it means to instrument their software to be operable.
So, how does someone, making it operable, how does someone go about setting and defining and building and deploying best practices around DevOps? I mean, how do you, as an organization, do something like that?
I think at the end of the day, everybody's organization and their policies and their compliance requirements are different than everyone else's. So, I mean, the goal of DevOps is really a meta goal. It really is to make sure that as software engineers and systems administrators and operators they share the responsibility for making sure things run and deliver business purpose. So putting them on equal footing, making sure that both teams can, if they have to be separate, they can call each other out on things and be safe. I think that really how you merge those teams together and whether you can completely merge them depends on the organization. But the goal is to make sure that finger pointing isn't successful.
Okay. So, assuming finger pointing is not happening, what does a typical day look like? For instance, say someone wants to move into a DevOps position. What would their typical day be like?
I would say in a good organization where DevOps culture exists, you don't really move into a DevOps position because everybody is DevOps all the time. So in that respect, your day doesn't actually look much different at all. Software engineers are writing code, and systems operators are checking failures, studying the pathology of explosions in production. But when things do go wrong, and when troubleshooting happens and when deployment happens, I think that's when you don't see the typical boundaries between those two groups. So, people don't spend all of their days deploying software. If they do, they've got a lot of things to fix. But typically you spend most of your time writing software and then some small fraction deploying it. It means that you actually have access to deploy it. As a software engineer, you're responsible for making sure those bits that you built get pushed out into production and that they're running right.
So, for someone thinking about this as a career, what would be the key attributes and skills that someone would have to become a skillful DevOps?
I think the idea that you have one thing and you kind of have a problem domain or you have an area of expertise like I know Java or I know C or I know PHP. Those type types of mindsets have to fall away because PHP doesn't run itself. It actually runs on a kernel, and it runs on a computer, and it runs over a network, and all of those things are pretty critical. So you really need to stop thinking about what you're doing in a very isolated way. You need to think of it very cohesively. There's just so many parts and complex systems that deliver, and you need to be able to learn, or at least embrace learning all of the different components. So I would be prepared for an eye-opening experience as you get into the nuances of network stacks and how TCP reacts and things like that. And all of that stuff is your problem when you do DevOps.
So thinking about a young DevOps and also putting them in, say, a large-scale website, something of the scale of, LinkedIn or an Etsy or Amazon or something like that. A young person, is it harder for them to master performance, reliability, scalability, or security, or is there something else that's the hardest thing to master as a DevOps?
I don't think any difficult. I think things like scalability is a little more tricky than performance. Performance is a very rinse and repeat sort of, there are fixed methodologies for approaching performance problems. Scalability requires a little bit more creative thinking. The systems are slightly more complex. But all of those skills that get honed. I think that really young DevOps in an organization, if you're fresh and you like the concept of DevOps, you already have an advantage. You don't want to walk away from a problem. So, the key characteristics are to really be tenacious, right? You have to be able to pursue the problem to the end of the end of your expertise. And some organizations allow you to do that a little better than others. So if you're in an organization that really gives you a very long leash in problem solving, you're in the right place to have it in DevOps.
So DevOps as a craft or a field or a discipline, what do you think it is? More of a craft or more of a discipline? Or is it a way of thinking? Or is there something that helps define what it is?
I think, yeah. I don't actually really like the term DevOps so much. It's certainly caught on. I think that successful organizations have always had engineers on staff that could really transcend the boundaries of organizational groups. And that is what DevOps is. DevOps is about having people in both the software engineering group and the operations group transcend those boundaries and be able to apply not both of them to each other. So I think that, it's a tricky question.
Yeah. So here's one that I don't think is as tricky. One of the things that to me is a little confusing, though, is if DevOps is working really well, you should not see it or feel it in your organization. Is that kind of the case where the better you are, the less people know, or the harder it's going to be to monitor your own DevOps? Because if everything is running great and scaling how you need it and how fast you need it and performing as quick as you need it, how do you measure that if you're already hitting it all in stride?
Well, I think if your systems are performing and scaling and all of that, that's easy to measure because they're performing and scaling to your specs. I think that accomplishing those goals is equally possible with and without DevOps. I think that what the DevOps culture and the attitude when software engineers need to develop software rapidly, and there's a lot of agile deployment, continuous integration exercises, when you have that sort of desire inside of an organization, and not all organizations need that, but when you have that desire, those engineers need to be responsible for application performance and uptime and availability. And that's where DevOps comes in and is very, very strong. And in a lot of places like banks, I'm sure there's some banks that have DevOps culture in them, but generally speaking, there are so many human processes that are managed through organizational process control that they still accomplish all those same goals, but by necessity, they move a little slower, and that's fine for them, and that works great. So it really depends on what your organization is. If you're going to move fast, you need to break down the walls.
Okay, so one last question that kind of touches on two things. What do you think the most important contributions a sharp DevOps person can make to an organization? And how do they know if they've achieved excellence?
I set my bar high for excellence, so I don't ever feel like it's really achieved. But I think that one of the things that we see lacking in most organizations, at least from the consulting perspective when I go in, is that there is a tremendous amount of domain knowledge in the infrastructure group that understands what's deployed, how things are provisioned, how things work, what software is available, that sort of thing. And then there's a tremendous amount of domain knowledge in the software engineering group about what needs to get done from a business requirements side. They're the ones that get the business requirements to build applications, and they have to function a certain way. And there's not enough knowledge sharing. And the reason that happens is because both groups think the other one has no idea how to do their own job, right? So the ops guys, why would I share the infrastructure information with the software engineer guys? They're just writing code. It's not their problem. It's not their area of expertise. And at the end of the day, that leads to ignorance and really stupid decisions. And when things move fast and have to scale, those bad decisions lead to collapse. So a good DevOps person, the opportunity that they have is to be embedded in both groups so well that they get to actually bridge those knowledge gaps, and make much better decisions. And if they accomplish that and they get a big bonus or a rev share or something like that, then I guess they can consider themselves achieving excellence.
How do they know?
Set the bar higher.
How do they know it personally? I mean, just by the fact that they solved the problems and found the solutions they needed?
I feel like, that's really hard. I mean, personal measurements are just that, they're personal. I personally feel very satisfied when I participate in removing obstacles that I identify. Right? When I look at a group of people and I know, looking at the path that they're on, it's going to take 8 hours to get their job done, and when I participate and bridge those knowledge gaps and it now takes 45 minutes or an hour, I saved 7 hours of time for every single person on both teams during that process, and to me that's extremely satisfying to realize that I increased other people's productivity so tremendously.
Excellent. So Theo, Velocity as a conference, you're going to be in Santa Clara this June?
That's the plan.
And I understand you're also having more involvement with Velocity Asia in Beijing?
Yes, I will be the conference chair for Velocity China this year.
Excellent. So we'll be seeing you both in Santa Clara and in Beijing.
Exactly. I'll do my best to grow my beard back. Seems like what I'm known for.
Well, thank you very much, Theo. It's been great talking with you, and we'll see you in about a month and a half in Santa Clara.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thanks.